they were. However, people, when they come to looking at sociology, they're going to look at it from these three major theoretical approaches. These are the three that we will emphasize again and again and again. In fact, at the end of every chapter, you'll see a chart that has at least two of these three at the end of every chapter. How do you look at religion from a structural, functional approach, social conflict approach, symbolic interaction? How do you look at marriage from these three? How do you look at politics from these three? I want to go over these three very, very quickly, and we'll go over them again later. And as we do this, I want you to think, more than likely there's going to be one of these three that you fit more than the others. You're going to see yourself in all three. But there's one that's I call it the default mechanism. What I want you to do, or my goal, is that you develop the ability to see things from all three perspectives. It'll help you tremendously, especially in dealing with other people. You know, and so can you see issues from all three perspectives? But when push comes to shove, you have a default mechanism. You have one that you cast away. You back me up in a corner, then this is how I'm going to look at things. But I want the ability to see it from all three perspectives. Structural functional, social conflict, symbolic interaction. All right? So here we go. Hang on to me just for a little while. The structural functional approach. Sometimes this is called functionalism. So everybody can see. All right, so sometimes this is functionalism. Of the three approaches, functionalism is the most, is that right? The most scientific. It doesn't mean that the other ones are not scientific. What it means is that this one uses the scientific method. It's called positivism. The scientific method where you experiment with things. The key word for the functionalist, oh man, is the key word is stability. A functionalist will look at society, the structural functional, and say that society is structured. That's where that idea comes in. That society has a structure to it. Each part of the structure has a function to play. So you have structural functional. All right? Each part has a function to play. Every part of society is interdependent on each other. They're independent but interdependent. In other words, they all have a function to play, but if there's a breakdown in one part of it, it's going to affect the other parts of it because they're all interrelated, like the human body. Who in here is studying to be a nurse? All right, how many systems does our body have? 11? I don't know, nervous system, digestive system, skeletal system, cardiac system. And every part, even though they're independent, every part is interdependent on each other, and every part has a function to play. So if you have a breakdown in the cardiovascular system, it's going to affect all the other parts of the system, right? So if you want to fix it, you got to find out where the problem is and fix it. And the problem may not be where the symptoms are. If you take your car to a mechanic, if every time you take your car to the mechanic, a mechanic says, you know what, we're going to have to replace the engine, you've got a bad mechanic. Mechanic's going to hear the noise, try to figure out, okay, it's in this part of the system. Because the automobile is a machine with many, many different parts. Every part is interrelated. And so a functionalist looks at societies all over the world and starts to notice some common parts of the system. Things like, in other words, these are things that are in every society. There may be differences, but they're in every society. For example, every society has some idea of family in it. The family could be one husband, one husband, more than one wife, more than one husband. The family may be, 2.5 children or 12 children. The family may be all kinds of relatives, aunts and uncles, or it could be just on your mama's side or your daddy's side. So there's a great deal of variety about what a family is, but every society has some idea of family in it. So apparently, families have a function to play in society. Does that make sense? All right. Every society has some type of educational system in it. I mean, you got to teach the kids to do something, Now, if you're in a less modern society, a society that is still in agricultural, well, then a big part of the educational system is going to be learning how to grow stuff. You know, if you're in the jungles of Brazil somewhere where you got to go out and kill your food, well, then a big part of the educational system is how do you shoot a bow and arrow. Does this make sense? If you're in a high-income country like ours, a big part of the educational system is trying to prepare you to work on computers or to be doctors or to be lawyers, because these are the skills that you need to survive in this culture. And so every society has, so apparently the educational system is important. Apparently the educational system has a function to play in society. And so if there's a breakdown in the educational system, the problem may not be education, the problem could be the family. Right? It could be the government, another part. And so these parts of the system, these institutions, government, economics, family, religion, education, healthcare, those kind of things you find in every society, and so apparently they have a function to play. And people have a way to keep what causes stability and reject what causes instability. You see. And so for a functionalist, you don't necessarily want to change things, but you may want to fix it. Change is not a good thing in a structural functional perspective. If it changes, change has to happen very, very slowly. Because if it happens quick, it causes instability, and instability is bad from a functionalist perspective. So the definition, you can see it's a framework for building theory that sees society as a complex system whose parts work together to promote solidarity and stability. Every part has a function to play. There are three types of functions. Okay? The manifest function is the recognized and intended consequence of that part of society. Intended consequence is really good if you can just remember that. The manifest function is the intended consequence. Every society has a family in it. An idea of family. The manifest function is the primary reason, or reasons, it could be two or three, but it's not going to be a whole lot. The primary reason for that part of society. So you tell me, what do you think is the manifest function? What's the primary reason that every society has a family? What's the primary thing that a family is supposed to do in society? Huh? Do what? No. What's the primary reason for family? Reproduction. You know? And socialization. The manifest function of a family is, every society wants to continue itself. And so reproduction. And all over the world, please hear this the correct way, all over the world societies have said the best place to have children is in a family. Now how you define that family, it may be different, but that's the best place to have children and to add to the culture. But then once you have children, you want the society to continue, so you got to teach those kids how to live in that society, how to live in that culture, and that's the socialization process. And so so every society has some idea of family, and the manifest function of the family is reproduction and socialization. That's the intended consequence. All right? The latent function is the unrecognized and unintended consequence. So if the manifest function is the intended consequence, the latent function is the unintended consequence. But here's the thing. The latent function is something that usually happens within that part of society, but it's not the main reason for that part of the society. It's not a bad thing. It's just something that usually happens. And so within a family, the manifest function of the family is to reproduce, to have children, and to teach those children how to live in that society. A latent function of the family would be things like caring for each other, giving each other emotional support. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. That's not the manifest function, but that usually happens in a family, and it's a good thing. You follow me? It usually happens, and it's a good thing. You know, people get emotional support and financial support, all those kind of things. You know, nobody else loves me, my family does, you know, kind of stuff. You see, all right? The third type of function is a dysfunction. And a dysfunction is the unintended negative consequence. All right, make sure you write that down. It's a social pattern that disrupts the operation of society. An easier way to say that is the unintended negative consequence. So the manifest function of the family is the manifest function is the intended consequence. The latent function is the unintended consequence, but it's a good thing. The dysfunction is the unintended negative consequence. When this happens in that part of society dysfunctions, and as a result of that, it starts to break down other parts of society. Right? And so the violence, you know, the most violent place to live is the home. That's a dysfunction of the family. More and more studies are coming out to talk about, you know, latchkey kids, people who come home after kids who come home after school and the parents aren't there, so they're not getting that socialization process. They have to take care of themselves. That's a dysfunction, and that dysfunction starts to break down other parts of society. So if you want to fix the system, then you got to find out where the dysfunction is. Now there are two ways that a dysfunction occurs. All right. Two ways that a dysfunction occurs. One is what's called an anomie. This is a term by Durkheim. And basically what an anomie means is this. Okay? There's no longer a general consensus about what the manifest function is. In other words, as long as most people in society agree about the manifest function of a part of society, well then there's stability and things go pretty good. But when you get into a society where all of a sudden there's a big deal of disagreement about what is the manifest function, that's called an anomie. So there's a breakdown of a general consensus about the manifest function. A second way that a dysfunction occurs is when the latent function becomes a manifest function. If I think that the primary reason to have children is to have somebody who I can love and support, and so I have children, and instead of being a parent to that child, I become that child's best friend, and I never tell my child no because that's a bad thing. I don't want you, you know. The latent function becomes a manifest function, and the family starts to dysfunction, and so now that child goes off to school, never been disciplined in their life, and now a teacher has to spend all this time correcting the child, and your child who's well behaved gets a worse education because so much attention's got to be given to the child who has a friend at home instead of a parent. That make sense? And it starts to break down. The latent function becomes the manifest function. College education. Since you're all here in college, what's the manifest function of a college education? I mean, why are you here?
To prepare for a job.
To get a job so you can make more money. I mean, no one ever says, I want to go to college so I can get a worse job making less money.
So it's education, isn't it?
You know. Huh?
It's just education.
Education, but since we're in college, college education. The manifest function of college education is to train you to do something so that you can make a living and contribute to society. What are some latent functions of a college education? What oftentimes, and this is not a bad thing, but what happens on college campuses, that's just the way it is. It's neither good nor bad. It's just kind of what happens. Huh? If you go off to a university especially, you may join a sorority, you know, a lot of parties, the social life. A lot of people meet the person who they marry while they're in college. Now, is that the reason you go to college? No, but it's a good thing. I mean, it's good to have a social life. You following me? It's good to kind of let things loose after you've been studying all week, you know, all that kind of stuff. Those are latent functions. They happen at colleges, and it's a good thing. Are you following me so far? What happens if the latent function becomes the manifest function? What happens if a person decides, you know what? The only reason I'm here at school is so I can party all the time. The education's secondary. I'm here to have a good time. What happens? They end up getting kicked out of Martin, come to the community college, when they can get back into Martin someday. You see. It's dysfunctioned. Does that make sense? Another latent function of a college education is an athletic program. You know. But the manifest function of a college is not to have a good football team. But boy, I can think of a lot of colleges who the athletic program runs the academic program. And that system starts to break down. You see. When the manifest function becomes, when the latent function becomes the manifest function, it causes a dysfunction in the whole thing. But what's the manifest function of government? Anybody? What's the manifest function of government? Huh?
Keep society running.
Keep society running. Take care of people.
It has to have structure for the...
Not a structure. Our society, there is no longer a general consensus in society about what the manifest function of government is. And so our government is dysfunctional. Highly dysfunctional. Because nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing. You see. Apparently they're supposed to spend more money, but that's, you know. And so it starts to affect other parts of society, all right? So that's functionalism. Let me see. Functionalism, the key word to remember is stability. Conflict. All right, conflict, the key word is inequality. Karl Marx is the kind of the father of the conflict perspective. He saw everything related to the economy, and basically you had the haves and the have-nots. It's all about the economy stupid, is what Karl Marx would have thought. And in society you have two classes of people. The working class, which is on the lower rung, and then the capitalist class. Or the bourgeoisie, which is the capitalist class, and the proletariat, which is the working class, are the two words that he used. And it's not fair, because the haves keep getting more and more and more, and those who don't have keep getting less and less and less. You know, it's kind of the old saying, the rich get richer, and the poor have kids. You see. And so you've got this class warfare developing, and Karl Marx thought, and so Karl Marx was pointing out inequality based on economics. And he said that's not fair. You've got to create some balance. You've got to take the inequality out of it. And his solution to take the inequality out of it was for the government to step in and take more and more and more, get rid of private ownership, redistribute the wealth so everybody has an equal, at least a more equal setting than they do if we keep going the way, at least in his day and time, the way things were going. All right, so to the extreme it's Marxism or Communism. To a less extreme it's Socialism. Karl Marx himself, who wrote a booklet with a friend of his called the Communist Manifesto, said that it was misunderstood. And Karl Marx himself said, I'm not a Marxist. You know, we throw Karl Marx and we make him a bad guy, and all he was doing was trying to create some type of equality based on economics. You know, because, man, it's really not fair for some people to make millions and millions and millions of dollars a year and somebody else not to make nearly that much. Especially once that person dies and passes all that wealth down to their children, who now the children are wealthy and they didn't even do anything to earn it. And then it gets passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation. You see. And so you got to create equality into the system somehow or another. That's the conflict. Now here's how you create equality. You point out the inequality. The inequality causes conflict. Now for the functionalist, conflict is bad because it creates instability. But for the conflict person, you want to create the conflict. So you point out the inequality that causes the conflict, and that results in change. And so a conflict perspective doesn't want to fix the system. The conflict person wants to change the system. The system cannot be fixed. You got to throw it out and start something else. You got to change it. And the way you change it is you point out inequality that causes conflict, because anytime you have motion, you have conflict. You know, I mean, your tires, as you drive the car, your tires get hot because there's conflict, there's tension from the tires in the road. So as you're moving forward, the only way you move forward, the only time a turtle makes progress is when he sticks his neck out. You see. Conflict is a part of it. And so Karl Marx pointed out the inequality based on economics that caused conflict, but it resulted in change. And even though, you know, I don't know if you know anything about Karl Marx, but even if you say, I'm not a socialist, well, you know what, United States, if you get a job and you only got to work 40 hours a week, and if you work more than 40 hours a week, they got to pay you time and a half, and you've got health insurance, and you've got a retirement plan and a 401k, you need to say, thank you, Karl Marx, because all those are a result of him saying we need more equality in the system. You see. We got to have equality. Public education is a result of pointing out the conflict. Only the rich can go to school. We got to make it where everybody can go to school so everybody can have a better chance at a better life. Those are conflict perspectives. So he did it based on economics. W.E.B. Du Bois comes along. He starts pointing out based on race. You know, we got a race. Things aren't fair in our society based on race. Martin Luther King Jr. picked it up from W. Du Bois. He kept pointing out, you know, inequality based on race. That caused all kinds of conflict. I mean, he was thrown in prison. Did you know that one time in Montgomery, Alabama, Martin Luther King Jr. was pulled over in his car, arrested on the spot, and thrown in jail because he was going 30 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour speed zone? Did you know that? You know. Can you believe it? And so he kept pointing out inequality. It caused all kinds of conflict. Eventually it caused him his life. But as a result of the conflict, you have change. Right? And you had women come along. Harriet Martineau was one of them. And Jane Addams, another one, who started pointing out inequality based on gender. You know, women didn't have the right to vote until, what, 1920-something? You know, and so to point out, so you have the women's movement come along, and you know, because and even today we think it's good, but did you know that on average a woman makes 70 cents for every dollar a man makes doing the exact same job? You see. And so there's inequality based on gender, but yet that's resulted in change. Somebody else comes along, they start to point out inequality, they say, you know, I'd really like to go to that college down the road, but all the classes are on the 3rd floor and there's not an elevator and I'm in a wheelchair. You know. Or I'd like to go to that grocery store, but I can't get in because there's steps. And so they start pointing out inequality based on disabilities. Cause all kinds of conflict. I mean, if you're a builder, all of a sudden the codes say if you build a 2-story building, it's a public building, you got to have an elevator. And man, the cost of building that building just skyrocketed. And believe it or not, people fought that. You know, because it's going to, we don't need that. There's only a small percentage of people who need that, cause all kinds of conflict. Now we have change. And I dare say every one of us in this room prefer the handicap stall over the other stalls in the bathroom. You know, one's coach, the other's first class. You see. Now we've seen inequality, people basing inequality based on sexual orientation. Man, we're in a process of all kinds of conflict. People are being killed and beat up and vandalized for no other reason than their sexual orientation. But we're on the cusp of change. So you see how that works? You point out the inequality, it causes the conflict, and it results in change. You see. Functionalist wants to fix it but not change it because it causes instability. Conflict, no, we got to cause it because it's not fair. We've got too much inequality. We've got to change the system. All right? Symbolic interaction. The key word here is interpretation. Interpretation. From a symbolic interactionist, look at the word symbolic for a minute. Symbolic interactionist says everything in life is symbols. Everything is symbols. And as we go throughout our day, we are interacting with each other based on our interpretation of the symbols that are around us. All right? Everything in this room is a symbol. I mean, I don't have to explain to you what that is hanging from the wall. It's a symbol, and as soon as you walk in, you saw it, you knew what it was. The clock on the wall is a symbol that all of you are familiar with because you've been looking at it. You know. But it's a symbol. No one in this room looks at the clock and say, let me see, the big hand is getting close to the 9 and the small hand close to the 9, the little red hand, so it's about 8:45. Right? It's a symbol. What do? Boom, boom. We know exactly what time it is. There could be no numbers on that clock at all, just the hands, and we would know what time it is, right? Because it's a symbol. No one, I hope, when they're driving a car, comes up to a sign and goes, stop. You know what it represents, and you stop. Now, as long as you interpret the symbol of a stopping the same way I interpret the symbol of the stop sign, no problem. But if for whatever reason you think red means go, and and all of a sudden, boom, there's a collision. So here's the thing. Now, being a student is symbolic. It's a symbol. Being a teacher is symbolic. It's a symbol. So you and I are interacting with each other, symbolic interaction. We are interacting with each other based on our interpretation of what it means to be a student and what it means to be a teacher. Does that make sense? You have an idea what it means to be a teacher and a student, and I have an idea what it means to be a teacher and a student, because those are all symbolic. And as long as you're interpreting what it means to be a student and a teacher the same way that I'm interpreting what it means to be a student and a teacher, well, then things go pretty well. But if your interpretation is different than mine, we may have conflict. But that's just because we're interpreting things differently. It's neither good nor bad. We're just interpreting it differently. You see. And as we go throughout our day, we have our interactions with each other based on how we're interpreting the symbols that are around us. And it changes moment to moment. Thus, functionalism and conflict are macro-level analysis. They're looking at the big picture. Symbolic interaction is micro-level. It starts with the individual. Right? So, for example, if we take the issue of unemployment, from a macro level, symbolic or structural functional, we might decide that, or based on research, 10% of the population is unemployed in the United States, or 10% of the workforce is unemployed. Where's the dysfunction? Well, it could be that we're losing all of our industrial jobs overseas, so we need to give companies tax credits to keep their jobs here, and that'll help the employment. Have you heard these arguments before? You see? Because you're looking at unemployment now. Where's the problem? Let's fix it. You see? Right? But you're starting with unemployment, or structural functionalists may do some type of research that says, okay, 10% of the workforce are unemployed. Now, based on our research, here are some jobs that if you hold these jobs, you're more likely to be unemployed than other jobs. Have you seen those? People in these industries are losing their jobs at a higher rate. And so you're just trying to look at unemployment as a whole. And then I may break down and say, based on what I know, you're in a category that's more likely to be unemployed than somebody else. But it's macro. You started with the big picture and you moved down. Somebody from a conflict perspective is going to look at unemployment macro. The unemployment rate is about 10%. Now let's look at it. Let's study unemployment and see if we can find any inequality. You know, right now, based on the research, men are more likely to lose their jobs than women. You see. All right, that's not fair. All right, where's the inequality? You know, now how do we fix that? The unemployment rate is about 10%. In the African American community, the unemployment rate is closer to 20%. And among African American male, the unemployment rate is almost 40%. Does anybody see a problem with that? Well, yeah. There's got to be some inequality going on somewhere. You see, and so a conflict perspective is, can we find out where the inequality is, and now what can we do to try to change it? You see. Now, a symbolic interactionist is not going to look at unemployment first. A symbolic interactionist is going to find some people who are unemployed. All right, and so Allison is unemployed. Cindy is unemployed. Now, unemployment is symbolic. If I have a job and I meet somebody who's unemployed, I'm going to interact. The interaction is going to be a little bit strange, especially if I know them. And man, I'm so sorry you lost your job. So, right? Because we're interacting based on, and she's thinking, you jerk, I should have that job. So we're you following me? But now a symbolic interaction, this is going to look at people who have lost their jobs. And so I'm going to follow Allison's lost her job, Cindy's lost her job. And then I'm going to start to notice some things because it's micro. And I notice Allison's lost her job, and in losing her job, she says, you know what? I'm going to take advantage of this. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to learn another trade, become a nurse or whatever. And it's going to be hard, but years down the road, I'm going to look back and think, you know what? Losing my job is the best thing that ever happened to me. Cindy loses her job, and she thinks, oh man, there it is again. The man's against me again. I just going to quit. This is the third job I've lost, and there's just no use anymore. And so I'm going to turn to drugs and alcohol and hate everybody. Now, a sociologist wants to know, why did you interpret unemployment one way and you interpret unemployment another way? Are you following me? Because it's micro level. And so I'm going to study the families. And I may find out, Allison, she's got more support from her family. You know, they're in there encouraging her. They're helping her. It's kind of a safety net. You know, we can kind of help you get along until you get back on your feet. You know, Cindy, on the other hand, her family, like, man, you've never been any good. You're always da-da-da. And there's no support there, no safety network, da-da-da. And all of a sudden, I'm going to extrapolate that out to the whole, and I'm going to decide a person who loses their job but has a strong family structure or friends and family to help them will handle that unemployment better than a person who does not have that strong structure around them. Does that make any sense? And so I'm studying the individual, but then now I'm going to spread it out to, now I can kind of predict on a broader basis what's going to happen. That's symbolic interaction. There are symbols all around us. We interact with each other based on the symbols, based on our interpretation of the symbols, and somehow or another through all that, we try to give our lives meaning and purpose from that.